Welcome to the Riveo Impact Lab, the podcast in which we explore what it means for small businesses to have real impact in an evolving world. On this podcast, we engage our curiosity around topics like sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and the ethical outcomes of our decisions, all from a small business perspective.
Hi, I'm Emily.
And I'm Ellen. In this episode, Emily has a conversation with Erin Page, the VP of Accessibility at Allyant, a company that provides a suite of accessibility solutions for people with disabilities so they can receive equal access to information, whether digitally or in print. Erin describes himself as, quote, a blind technologist, accessibility executive, and public speaker who believes digital inclusion gets better when we talk about it honestly. Erin helps lead companies through accessibility-related challenges such as compliance, litigation support, audits, and more.
Erin was a fantastic person to speak to regarding accessibility, and he really opened up my perspective to thinking of things not from an accommodation mindset, but from a digital equity mindset. And he'll go into more of what that means in the episode. And he also offers some simple and practical advice. So I think wherever you are on your accessibility journey, this episode is for you. One important note is that Erin mentions a few laws that you may or may not be familiar with. So if you want to learn more about these things like the Accessible Canada Act, the European Accessibility Act, Title II regulations, HHS regulations, and more, you can check out our companion blog on our website, www.riveocreative.com/riveo-impact-lab. All right, let's get into the episode. Erin, welcome to the Riveo Impact Lab. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to kind of jump in. You are the Vice President of Accessibility at Allyant, and so your work takes place at this interesting intersection of technology and accessibility. So I'd really be interested in learning about you and your background and what led you to this type of work, and specifically at Allyant.
Sure. Thanks. So I was born with congenital glaucoma. I lost my remaining functional vision when I was about 22 years old. So aging myself here, that was about 16, 17 years ago now. After I lost my sight, I went back to school. Well, first I went to a training program in Arkansas where I studied Braille and assistive technology, independent living skills, mobility skills, that kind of thing. And then after I was done with that, I enrolled at the University of Montana, where I got my bachelor's degree in business administration. And while I was a student there, I took up a job as a student employee at the IT help desk. And at that job, I was just doing things like resetting people's passwords, like helping them get connected to the Wi-Fi, that kind of thing. And while I was a student there, another blind student, it was not me, but another blind student filed an Office of Civil Rights complaint against the University of Montana, stating that the university was using inaccessible electronic and information technology. The university ultimately had to do a settlement agreement with the Department of Education. And as part of that settlement agreement, they had to put together an accessibility program from scratch, including things like testing software, doing training, you name it. And so they realized when starting to put together their program, they had this blind student who was working in the IT help desk and actually asked me if I would be interested in working with them to do software testing, accessibility trainings, workshops, that type of thing. And so I agreed to that and started doing accessibility work as a student employee, kept doing it throughout the rest of my time until I graduated. Stuck around the university for a couple of years after that as a staff member doing software accessibility testing. And then a couple years after that, I saw a job opportunity for a screen reader auditor with a company called Accessible 360. Took up that job, and Accessible 360 eventually was acquired and became what is now Allyant. And so that's how ultimately I got to Allyant in the long run. So just an amazing coincidence of time in a sense, right? Had I have not taken up that student IT help desk job, or if that OCR complaint hadn't been filed, I might not have ever ended up necessarily in the accessibility space as a professional career. So kind of blows my mind sometimes when I think about it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible, and it's like a series of challenges turned opportunity. And now here you are getting to do this work, which is so important and I would imagine quite fulfilling.
Yeah, it is, right? And I've had this conversation with many other folks at Alliant, right? What a rare opportunity that I get to work for, a business, a for-profit company, and the kind of benefits that come along with that while doing good work, right? Promoting equal access to information. It's just such a rare opportunity. I'm very thankful for it.
Getting to have that sense of fulfillment in, like you said, in a for-profit situation is, I think, rarer that it should be, but amazing that you get to do
Yeah.
that. That being said, can you talk a little bit more about Alliance? So, for those of our listeners who are unfamiliar, what is its mission, and what types of businesses is it equipped to support?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name Alliant is pretty new. It only came into existence in 2022. But our experience actually goes back to the early 1990s. Alliant is a combination of three legacy accessibility companies: T-Based Communications, Common Look, and Accessible 360. And they form three different pillars of our business because each one of these organizations focused on a different part of accessibility. T-based communications focused on alternative formats, Common Look focused on PDF and electronic document accessibility, and Accessible 360 focused on web and mobile accessibility, litigation support, that type of thing. And so by combining these three organizations together into what is now Alliant, we really created we like to say, the world's only trusted end-to-end accessible communications provider, right? If you are a city water department, right, and you have a website that you need to make accessible, an online payment portal that needs to be accessible, you have billing statement PDFs that need to be accessible, and you need to be able to provide Braille upon request or large print. Alliant is equipped to be able to do all of that within one organization rather than farming it out to three. And so that makes us very, very unique in the space, I'd like to think.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's, like you said, I think it's definitely unique, but very needed and allows people the opportunity to get connected with an organization like yours and even show them maybe some areas that they do need accessibility and haven't yet realized it or haven't yet realized how it's going to actually help their business. So, that being said, I want to pull back a little bit into like a bigger idea, which is a term I've seen you use, which is digital equity. Can you explain what digital equity means?
Yeah, we like to think that digital equity means equal access to information, right? Whether it's a website, it's a mobile app, it's an electronic document. Digital equity means that those digital environments, those digital platforms, they're just accessible, they just work. We here in the United States often have a very kind of accommodation-centric mindset, right? If somebody needs access to something and it's not accessible, we'll provide a reasonable accommodation at that time. It's kind of thought of as the baseline, but that's not really digital equity, right? Because that involves, well, now that disabled user has to self-identify, they have to submit a request, they have to try to get that organization to do it. That organization might have to establish a partnership with a vendor like Alliant to produce that alternative format. There's all these things that have to occur for an accommodation to work. So an accommodation doesn't mean something is equitable or accessible. It's what you do when something's not. Digital equity means that if something is truly accessible, it just simply works. I, as a screen reader user, can visit the website and it just works. I don't have to turn on accessibility mode or flip some switches or use the separate alternative view of the website, right? If a PDF document is accessible, a student who downloads it can just simply open it and it will read with their screen reader, right? They don't have to send it to disability services and wait 2 weeks for the alternative format to be created and sent back to them, right? It's much like, architectural accessibility. We think of things like ramps, right? And if you build a building with accessibility in mind, people who rely on wheelchairs, things like that, are able to just simply get in. The building is designed with those things in mind. They don't have to ask for help to do it. That's the goal that you want to achieve for your digital environments as well.
That is so well put, and that's such an interesting idea of changing our view from accommodation to equity to actually just being able to have a wider swath of users be able to participate in whatever digital platform you've created. I'm curious, when thinking about digital equity versus accommodation, what have you noticed as far as the landscape of that changing since you first began your work? And what are maybe some of the biggest wins? Let's start there. What are some wins that
Yeah.
you've seen in this?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest wins are on the legal side of things, right? When I first started working in this space back around 2012, there was not a lot of necessarily specific laws and regulations that were out there. There were a few, right? But in just recent years, we've seen the Accessible Canada Act and their new regulations that go into effect in 2027, 2028. We've seen the European Accessibility Act, which just it hit its deadline last year, 2025. We've seen the Title II regulations and the HHS regulations here in the United States. We've seen state level laws, Washington, Maine, Colorado, California, all these different states are implementing laws. Some I like, some I don't, but people are acting on it. And I think that's one of the biggest wins, that change in mindset. It's much more focused on accessibility now. When I first started working at Accessible 360, the vast majority of our clients were coming to us because they had been sued. They were coming to us reactively because they had been sued. And that is no longer the case. It does still happen. We certainly do have clients who come to us because of accessibility litigation. There is a bit of a cottage industry that's formed around that. But it no longer comprises the majority of our customers. The majority of our customers now are coming to us proactively because of laws and regulations rather than reactively because of litigation. And I think that is just a huge win.
That is really encouraging, actually, to hear all of the ways that the landscape is changing positively. And that difference between being proactive and reactive is a tell that something is going in the right
Yep,
direction, for
I
sure.
agree.
When you're taking an honest inventory of the digital landscape, I'm sure there are so many challenges that have yet to be overcome. What would you say has been the hardest challenge at this point?
Yeah, it's funny, and it definitely is still one that goes all the way back to my experiences back at the University of Montana, and that really is third-party content, third-party integrations. I tend to think of it as a bit of a donut hole where, let's say you're a university and you adopt a new learning management system. That learning management system turns out to not be accessible. Well, that university is the one that's really on the hook for the accessibility of that learning management system, unless they took steps during the procurement process to, vet it, include contract language requiring accessibility, indemnification, that kind of thing, which is very rare, right? And so it ends up falling on the organization that procured the technology rather than the vendor of the technology, right? And we still see that even now when you think of Title II or Title III entities, right? If you are a local city government and you use a third-party billing solution to process payments for city taxes, well, you might not necessarily have control over the accessibility of that platform, but if somebody can't access it, you are the one who is responsible for it, right? You have to provide that accommodation to the user. You're the one who has the Title II obligations that might not be fulfilled because of this inaccessible third-party solution. To me, third-party content and integrations has been a very long-standing accessibility issue. I'm slightly heartened in the last 2 years, I have had more conversations with folks about procurement accessibility than I have in my entire working career in accessibility. So procurement accessibility is finally getting on people's radar because the best protection you can do is when you're signing that contract, right? You can include language requirements around accessibility. If you have buying power, maybe you can get indemnification language, something like that. SLAs obligating them to fix those issues. Once you sign the contract, you're kind of at that vendor's mercy, but
Right.
you're still going to be the one liable for it. And so that third party content to me is just a very long standing issue that is getting better, but has a long way to go.
For small businesses, maybe in particular, who might be listening, what is a suggestion that you have for them to mitigate that? I guess, like you said, adding those terms in to begin with before signing a contract. But is there like
Yep.
a one step you might give a very small business that's juggling a lot of things?
Yeah, I would start with an inventory. One thing that has been very surprising to me over the years working in accessibility is how, websites, mobile apps, these digital services, they just naturally grow and expand over time. And eventually they can reach a point where the organization doesn't really know what they have anymore, right? It's running on autopilot. They don't know where all of their electronic documents are stored because they're scattered throughout the entire website, right? They don't know specifically what all third party solutions they have integrated because maybe some of them are free, right? So they're not paying a bill regularly for it. So conducting that inventory just to know what you have. Where are all of your documents? What are the accessibility issues that can be found by a scanner? What are those third-party tools that you have? Inventorying those things can really kind of help you know where to move, right? If your site is predominantly just hosting a lot of documents, then documents are probably where you need to focus. If your site is built using a ton of third-party widgets and tools and integrations, then you need to focus on your third-party content. If you're using just simply a WordPress site and it's all your own content, but you have a ton of web pages, web might be more your focus, right? Conducting that inventory can really kind of help you know where's my biggest deficit here? Where do I have that largest accessibility debt that I can start working on?
The term accessibility debt is interesting. I think that's helpful for people that already have these established businesses that, like you said, are just sort of running on autopilot at this point, that need to go back and rethink these things. But I am also curious for you, for people that are starting up, what is the biggest difference that you see between companies that sort of treat accessibility as an afterthought or now are just sort of having to come along, and those that prioritize accessibility as a foundational principle?
It's a great question. And I think to me, the biggest thing that jumps out is just the nature of the engagement, so to speak. So, organizations that are taking accessibility proactive, they can really weave it into their existing workflows and processes, their software development lifecycle, however they go about updating their web content, their marketing materials, that type of thing, as opposed to an organization that doesn't really take accessibility proactively and then is scrambling because the deadlines are coming up in 2 or 3 months or they received a lawsuit, right? At that point, you suddenly have no choice. You don't have that flexibility to really weave it in to your existing processes. It's really becomes this more all hands on deck. The sky is falling. Now we have to do everything we can. Now we can't actually work on our software roadmap for the next 6 months, right? Because we waited on accessibility and now we have to throw everything at that, right? And so the control that you have and that you lose over your own development life cycle and workflows, to me is probably the biggest difference between an organization that takes accessibility proactively. You don't have to do everything all at once. You can't do everything all at once. If you're proactive about it, though, you can really weave it in, take things step by step, develop a great timeline, great documentation over time. Whereas if you don't, then it's just now we've thrown out our roadmap for the next 6 months because all of our resources are going into a last minute accessibility scramble.
Mm, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, you like to think that people would come to understand the importance of accessibility just as solely the right thing to do. But often people need to see kind of like, oh, how is this benefiting my business or whatever. So when you run into people who are maybe like resistant to the work of creating a more accessible world, Is this something you try to bring them along with other reasons, or do you focus your attention on people that already understand its importance?
A story comes to mind, something that I will never forget, but it dovetails actually into the recent IFR regarding the Title II rules. So back when I was a student at the university, I will never forget that while doing a document accessibility workshop, I had a professor ask me, and thank God I had an instructional designer with me co-presenting. She knew how to talk to professors. I did not. I was a student at the time, so she jumped in. But this professor quite literally asks us, so if I just print everything out and provide everything on paper, can I avoid doing all of this? Not wanting to make his documents accessible. And when I was reading the interim final rule for the DOJ Title II regulations and some of the comments that were provided about it, some of the comments that were provided kind of said the same thing, right? Oh, well, these regulations are so onerous that we're just not going to have digital services. We're not going to allow people to pay their bills online. We're not going to host meeting minutes online. And, my kind of snarky response to that is good luck to a professor who wants to just provide everything on paper, like your students are going to riot, to a community who wants to do everything, on paper and not provide its citizenry the ability to do things digitally. Your citizens are not going to appreciate that, right? And they're going to vote for people who provide those services for their community, right? And so I just don't really kind of believe when I hear that statement, right? Well, we're just going to take it all down. No, you're not. I would say another kind of part to this is I generally try to operate from the assumption that nobody is creating inaccessible things intentionally, right? People just don't know. So I always want to educate. If it becomes evident that education isn't working or isn't being received, there's only so much you can do. And at that point, you're better off focusing your attention and resources on those who really want to embrace accessibility and work on it. When I was back at the university, we definitely had certain schools and programs that were very engaged in accessibility, proactively scheduled trainings. And then we had others that really had to be kind of drug along, right? We had to reach out to them. We had to try to schedule with them. They weren't really supportive of it. They were being forced into it, is how they felt. And so in those cases, I do think we all have very limited accessibility resources. And so it's best to focus those on the folks, the entities, the organizations that want to hear it.
And I completely agree. I think education is so important, and starting by giving people the benefit of the doubt is a fantastic starting place. And then over time, if it becomes clear that that was not warranted, then you move on to people that
Yep.
that understand. And I think that's great. So when thinking about your career as a whole, and thinking maybe specifically about some of these people that really just didn't know and were willing to be educated and have changed, is there a story that stands out to you as a good example of why you do the work that you do?
Yeah, I will tell you, I can't name the name, but we had a client of ours who came to us. They were small, medium-sized e-commerce, the prime target candidate for serial Title III litigation, right? As I said earlier, there's kind of a cottage industry that is formed, half a dozen law firms in particular that file just hundreds of these per year. And so one of our small to medium-sized business customers, they were targeted by one of these serial litigant firms. And this customer of ours, they really had gone above and beyond. I mean, when we audit a website, we provide criticality ratings, critical serious warning. They fixed everything, all priority levels, every issue in their project that we had found was fixed 100%. That's not a common thing, right, for us to see. And so these guys really did everything that they could, and they still got targeted by the serial litigation. And one of the things that I think we do at Allyant that really differentiates us is our litigation support services. And in our litigation support services, what we did was we provided a rebuttal report pushing back on the specific claims, which were just the handful of 4 or 5 generic claims that you see in most of these lawsuits. And we also provided a demo video of using that customer site with the screen reader, actually navigating to a product, adding it to the cart, going through the purchase flow, right? Showing rather than telling that this site is accessible. This plaintiff is saying they are blind, they use a screen reader, but here is a blind screen reader user actually using the website. And we provided those resources to our customer, and I got a message from their customer success manager a couple weeks later saying that they had settled, and they settled for $0.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
and that just tickled me pink because, not only did we make a website accessible, right? I fully stand by the fact that blind people can use that website. It is
Right.
accessible. We also help them swat down this serial litigation. Just such a win-win all the way around. And that, to me, that's how you do it. Make your content accessible. It puts you in the position to be able to push back if you get hit by that kind of serial litigation.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And like you said, you were able to prove that it worked. And that was what got them in the position to settle for $0, which is
Yep.
incredible.
Yeah. Does not happen a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't. I'm sure it doesn't, especially if there is this industry that is prepared to fight.
Yep.
So that's really incredible. And it sounds like Alliant was really able to provide the full support that this company needed and that they were willing to make all the changes that they needed to make. So
Yep.
overall, a win.
Yep, I think it's, one of the things that I think really makes Alliant unique is this litigation support. In the space, there's a lot of, token indemnification, or if you get sued, the vendor provides a form letter, those kind of things. Whereas we at Alliant, we actually rebut the specific claims. We provide video evidence like that. And that's why you see these kind of better outcomes in litigation. There is no silver bullet that's going to 100% prevent it from happening. But if you got a good vendor like Alliant, we'll stand by the work and help you if and when it comes.
That being said, because you did talk about being able to have lived experience and say, hey, we have someone who is blind using a screen reader and we can prove that this works. So,
Sure.
even when just learning about accessibility as a whole, how important is it to ensure that you're learning from people with lived experience versus just simply taking a course, completing an HR requirement, sort of seeing it as a task rather than actually learning from people with lived experience?
Few things to that. One of the things that I learned very early on doing the workshops and trainings at the university was the power of the demo. And actually, instead of just saying, professor, your course syllabus isn't accessible, I would have a TV on a cart rolled in and connect my laptop to it. And I would pull up their syllabus on it and read it with the screen reader. And it wasn't meant to like name and shame. What it was meant to do was to show here's what it actually means, right? The fact that you don't have good headings, here's what that means in reality. Like how you can scroll down quickly, I can't, right? How you can jump to the sections, I can't do that. Here's why your Frankenstein's table of merged cells and columns doesn't make sense when you read it out with a screen reader. Demoing that and showing how it actually impacts those users, it always creates that light bulb moment and generally makes people more receptive to what you're going to say after that, because now they kind of understand the why. It's always best to start off focusing on the why.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, even just when it comes to storytelling. You start with your why, because that gets people interested because you're sharing that there's an actual reason that they should be listening to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think also, when you're talking about just actual testing, the kind of practical, how do you test and get things done like that? There just simply is no substitute for the lived experience of a screen reader user, right? Or any assistive technology user. We employ a team in our digital group of native screen reader engineers they're all blind or low vision. They all have certifications like WAS, CPAC, CPWA, that kind of thing. Their role is to be able to test for those issues, those problems for screen reader users that, just a sighted engineer who knows how to use a screen reader might not find. No matter how hard you're trying, you have that benefit of like you can see the screen, you know what's going on. You're not fully reliant on that assistive technology. You're never going to be able to replicate that experience that the native user can. And so, kind of going back to the litigation that we talked about, when we do those rebuttal reports, we always do it using the same type of disability and the same assistive technology. And these serial plaintiffs, they always have blind plaintiffs, blind or low vision. I think I could probably count on one hand the number of times it wasn't a blind plaintiff that we've helped respond to. And they state the assistive technology. Like they might say they're using JAWS or NVDA or VoiceOver. And so when we go to review those claims, we want to do the same thing, right? They're saying blind plaintiff. We want one of our blind screenwriter auditors. They're saying they're using VoiceOver on an iPhone. We want them to test it using VoiceOver on an iPhone because that really replicates the full experience that that disabled user is having, as opposed to just a sighted engineer going and checking it with whatever screen reader they have available, right? That's never going to be equivalent. And some tools are better than others, like Wave, the WebAIM accessibility scanner is very transparent and it says clearly it can't find all issues. You have to do this testing with persons with disabilities. A lot of solutions don't, though, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. And I think, when you say it, it should be kind of obvious that, like you said, if you are just using the tool, but you also can see, you'll not notice the things that someone who's blind won't be able to access because you're just not having the same experience. So we kind of talked about this already when thinking about maybe small businesses in particular, small to medium-sized businesses that are looking for a next right step in terms of the third-party consideration and making a list. But if people are like, okay, I've listened to this episode, I want to make our product or our service or our website more accessible, what is one thing you would have them do right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I go back to that point of inventory, conducting that inventory to get your arms around what you have. I think it is very important. If you're looking for a few quick, simple wins, right? Things that we always recommend right out of the gate for any client, even if they're not a client of ours, have a good accessibility statement that says what you're doing, that accessibility is on your radar, right? The steps that you are taking, the standard that you are meeting or hope to meet in the future, a mechanism for users to report issues if they run into barriers, a skip to main content link. Very, very simple technical thing, getting into the technical weeds a tiny little bit here, but it's usually something very simple that shouts to these serial plaintiffs, hey, this company has accessibility on their radar, right? They go to their website and they see, look, they've got a working skip to main link. They have an accessibility statement. Why go after this site when there are plenty of others who've not even taken those basic steps? So I know a lot of the attorneys that we've talked to in the space really highly recommend this, just because if it deters 1 in 1,000 lawsuits and causes that attorney to just move on, then it's worth it. It doesn't really take a huge amount of time and effort to do.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really great first step that is pretty simple to take. You just have to make the time to do it. So I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to ask where people can find you. But my question is one that we ask of all of our guests at the Riveo Impact Lab, and that is, what does impact mean to you?
I'm glad you asked this because I didn't say this phrase in my previous response, and I kind of wish that I had. Accessibility, it sounds cliche, but accessibility truly is a journey. It's not a destination, right? You're never going to be quote unquote 100% accessible. There is no such thing, right? Technologies evolve, standards evolve, our understanding of how persons with disabilities are impacted, that evolves, the tools evolve, users have different technical skill levels with their assistive technology, right? I'm a highly proficient screen reader user, but my sister, who is also blind, isn't as proficient with her screen reader as I am, right? There are so many variables that there is just no such thing as something that is 100% accessible to everybody across all of those variables. It's kind of like saying, we're done with UX on our site. We're done making our site better because we think the UX is just perfect. That's never a thing, right? You're always changing it and you're always going to be improving it. And accessibility is very much the same thing. It's like security and privacy. It's something you're always going to be doing. And to me, impact, especially in the accessibility space, is just getting started on that road. Even if it's taking those small steps that we talked about before, right? Conducting an inventory, running a simple scanner on your site to find your documents, to list out your third-party content, having an accessibility statement. These are small, tangible wins for you that create significant impact over time, right? Once you've conducted that inventory, then you have data to go argue for budget. Hey, we've got 2,000 PDFs on our website that are all not accessible. We need this tool to remediate them. We need budget for it. It just opens the door for those subsequent steps. So that would be my answer. Is to me, impact, especially in this accessibility space, is really just getting on that road, taking any simple step you can, even if it's a small one, that adds up together.
I think that's a great answer. I love the phrase small wins equal significant impact over time. I think that's really encouraging and a very helpful way to look at these things because they can feel big, but really they're about taking these small steps one at a time. So that was incredible. Thank you so much, Aaron, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you or get connected with Allyant?
Allyant, it's Allyant. You can visit our website, allyant.com. You can find Allyant on LinkedIn. I am also very active personally on LinkedIn. Follow and join the network. I try to provide accessibility updates. I also am actually, on a side note, working on developing a video game accessibility mod. So if you're at all interested in learning more about that, you can find that information about that on my LinkedIn. We're also present at a lot of accessibility conferences and events, be it Disability In, M-Enabling in Washington, D.C. in October, and then Accessing Higher Ground, I will be there in November. So if any of you will be attending those conferences and events, you could find me there as well.
Excellent. Well, I hope that people do. Thank you so much again, Aaron, for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate the invite again and hope to talk to you again soon.
Our Make an Impact tip of the month. Look into adding a skip to main content button on your website. This is a simple step that shows you're thinking about accessibility. Thanks for listening, and make sure to do good in the world this month. If you have questions you'd like us to address on the podcast, you can reach us at info@riveocreative.com. Subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss out on any of our incredible upcoming guests. We'll see you soon at the Riveo Impact Lab.